All my life, and especially the past week or so, everybody has been showering Elder Holland with praises he doesn't deserve. So many people are saying things like, "Dude, Elder Holland was such a great apostle. He was such a spiritual speaker. He was such a fiery speaker. He was such a brave and bold defender of the faith. He never backed down from the truth," and stuff like that. This is all a bunch of nonsense that people have been brainwashed to believe. The truth is that Elder Holland was none of those things. Elder Holland was not a great apostle. He was an apostate traitor who liberalized the church. Okay? He wasn't a fiery speaker. He rarely spoke of any controversial truths. Instead, what he did was use stagecraft. All he was stagecraft. He would give socially safe messages and speak theatrically while doing so. He spoke theatrically all the time to trick people into thinking that he was some spiritual person. In fact, it's largely because of him that many church members today think you have to be crying in order to feel the Spirit or speak with the Spirit. Newsflash, everybody, just because someone whips up a bunch of tears at the pulpit and speaks with an emotional voice, that doesn't mean they're speaking with the Holy Ghost. And the culture of crying at the pulpit needs to stop. It is one of the greatest weaknesses of the church today, and it absolutely is not normal. If you cry every time you give a talk, you're doing that either because you're pretending like Elder Holland, or you've been culturally conditioned or brainwashed. Crying and getting tearful at the pulpit should not be a normal thing. Joseph Smith rarely cried whenever he gave talks. Moses rarely cried whenever he gave talks. Jesus and his original apostles rarely cried during their talks. And whenever they did cry, it was because of traumatic experiences, like the death of a loved one or severe suffering. Okay? So, unless you have PTSD or you're talking about some serious suffering you went through, you should not be crying at the pulpit. If you're someone who cries every time you give a talk, regardless of the topic, you need to realize that you're doing that because you've been psyoped by people like Elder Holland, and you're destroying the church. I'll explain why. There are two main reasons why senior leaders like Elder Holland cry and get emotional in their talks. The first is that it's a way to feminize the culture of the church. They know that if they cry and act effeminate, then other men who look to them for leadership will also cry and act effeminate. And it's worked. Mormon men today are stereotypically emasculine, passive, weak, cucked. That's a fact, and everybody knows it. And why do our corrupt leaders want effeminate men? Because effeminate men do not fight back. They do not talk back. They will not resist tyranny. They will not resist the New World Order, which our leaders have sold out to. They want effeminate men because they will happily give up their national identity, give up their guns, give up their free speech, and so forth. That's reason number one. The second reason is that crying and getting emotional at the pulpit is a way for them to imitate the Spirit, entertain you, and distract you from other issues that desperately need to be discussed. It's stagecraft. You go to church, you see them get emotional, and then you go home thinking, they seemed really passionate. They must be really close to God. I think I might have felt the Spirit. When in reality, all that really happened is that they gave the same generic, socially safe, lukewarm slop that you've always heard, year after year, decade after decade. And if it weren't for the theatrical, emotional delivery, you'd realize how useless, worthless, empty, and increasingly subversive their messaging has been. And in all fairness to a lot of you out there, a lot of you already know that you're being fed a lukewarm, garbage version of the gospel, a watered-down version of the gospel. And you're growing just as frustrated and suspicious as I am. But no, Elder Holland was not a brave and bold defender of the faith. Not at all. And for those of you out there who disagree with me, go review all the talks he ever gave, and you'll find that most of the time, he spoke only about topics that were socially safe and acceptable. Now, compare that to a prophet or an apostle who actually did his job, someone like Ezra Taft Benson or Mark E. Peterson. If you review all the talks they gave, you'll find that most of their messages were exactly the sort of thing that our generation desperately needs but never gets.
A liberal in the church is merely one who does not have a testimony.
Would you be interested in reading the Book of Mormon that records the downfall of two great ancient American civilizations as a result of internal secret conspiracies, and contains a warning to us today that when we see these conditions in our midst, that the Lord commands us to awake to our awful situation? With the increasing amount of aid and trade which we are providing the enemy of freedom, you might be interested to know what the Book of Mormon says will happen to a nation that upholds this conspiracy. Would you like to know of the warnings of the prophets about our increasing descent down the soul-destroying road of socialism?
What will a man give in exchange for his soul? What will a woman give in exchange for her soul? What is any soul worth? Would you exchange it for a thrill? Would you exchange it for advantage in business? Would you exchange it for social life, or for emancipation from home and family in some woman's liberation movement?
It should not be difficult to catch the vision of the responsibilities associated with such blessings. Responsibilities far and beyond those held by those who do not hold the priesthood. Let us consider just a few of these responsibilities. In the Scriptures we read, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." The Lord defined some very basic differences between men and women. He gave the male what we call masculine traits, and the female feminine traits. He did not intend either of the sexes to adopt the other's traits, but rather that men should look and act like men, and women should look and act like women. When these differences are ignored, an unwholesome relationship develops, which, if not checked, can lead to the reprehensible, tragic sin of homosexuality. In other words, we have a responsibility as priesthood holders to be examples of manhood.
The hopes and aspirations of the people have been betrayed. I hope this scholarly, unpublished memorandum by President Clark, with its penetrating analysis, will someday soon be available in full. Meantime, I urge all to read that solid volume, Stand Fast by the Constitution, which embodies much of President Clark's timely instruction. Meantime, let's have no further blind devotion to the communist-dominated United Nations. The open and covert management of the news in this country is another case, frightening in its implications. One high government official has made the appalling statement to the effect that it is all right for the government to lie to the people if it serves the government's purpose to lie.
And the reason why our generation never gets this kind of messaging is because our generation of leaders are cowards and traitors who want to be popular with the world. And that's exactly what Elder Holland was. Again, he was not a brave and bold defender of the faith. If he was, he would have preached against feminism. He would have preached Ephesians 5:22-24, Titus chapter 2, 4-5, 1 Corinthians 11, 7-9, and so on. Did he ever do this? No. Instead, he did the exact opposite.
But let me just say to the men in the room, and this is important, a marriage is a great continuing relationship of conversation and convictions and opinions. And in those conversations and convictions and opinions, one person is right, and the other person is called a husband. If you can get that down early, brethren, it'll just make life a lot smoother.
He actively went out of his way to undermine God's patriarchal culture. He not only told men to obey their wives, he also put feminist lies in the Come Follow Me program. He and his colleagues, the apostles in the first presidency, they put false doctrine in the Come Follow Me program, saying that a woman doesn't need to obey her husband, and that any instruction in the scriptures declaring that a wife should obey her husband, that's just an outdated social custom, and that today, men and women are equal partners.
Equal is a word that matters.
And sure, men and women are equally important, but at the end of the day, whether you have the guts to say it or not, men have a divine, rightful authority over their wives, and there's no getting around it. This is what the scriptures teach. This is what the standard works teach, and they are binding upon the church. So anything that violates the standard works is false doctrine. That means that we have false doctrine and Come Follow Me. And worse yet, we have false doctrine being taught in the temple of all places. And keep in mind, the living apostles today are the ones responsible for this. Elder Holland was responsible for this. They rewrote the temple endowment to fit a feminist narrative. They completely cut out the part of Genesis where God tells Eve to obey Adam. In fact, they cut out the oath that women used to make promising to obey their husband. And not only are they cutting stuff out, they're adding in lies. In the current temple endowment, when Eve is introduced to Adam, they show God the Father saying, "Adam, this is Eve, and you are to be helpmeets for each other." Now, did God the Father actually say that? Is that part anywhere in the scriptures? No, it's not. It's a lie. Eve was specifically made to be a helpmeet for Adam. Eve was told to obey Adam. In fact, it even says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 7 to 9, quote, "The woman is the glory of the man, for the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man." Close quote. So, women were created to be a helpmeet for men, not the other way around, and not even vice versa. Men have a divine right to rule over women, plain and simple, okay? If you're a Christian, there's no getting around that. Now, did Elder Holland ever teach this doctrine? No. Instead, he spent over 30 years undermining this doctrine. So no, he was not a defender of the faith, he was a subverter of the faith. He did not boldly stand for the truth, he distorted the truth. And again, I cannot stress this enough. He did it for over 30 years. 30 years. Now, some of you may be thinking, but wait, what about that musket fire talk he gave at BYU? Well, let me tell you about that talk. He gave that talk simply because he had no choice. He had to do something to pacify those of us who were starting to wake up. Elder Holland gave that talk because he was receiving an avalanche of complaints and grievances from disillusioned members of the church. People were getting upset because they'd send their kids off to BYU thinking it was a good place for them to go, but then their kids would return home as a completely different person with apostate worldviews. Their kids were turned into socialists, feminists, and pro-LGBTQ advocates. They were turned into apostates. Their kids would go off to BYU, get brainwashed to be liberal, lose their testimonies, and probably start sleeping around and committing other horrible sins, and then they'd return home as somebody completely opposite of who they were supposed to become. So, people were starting to wake up and realize that the church is not only being destroyed, but that it's being done by the church itself. So, what does Elder Holland do? He gives a single musket fire talk. And of course, did so with a tearful, quivery, cucked voice.
Those of you who know me are aware that I cry at the opening of supermarkets. I've wept over ribbon cutting at a used car lot. I have really been in tears since I walked in here, partly just for the nostalgia, but more than that is what I feel
when I am with you and when I'm on this campus. I'm going to try to talk about that if I can.
That talk was a joke. He never called LGBTQism the abomination that it is. They never do. The only reason his talk was controversial at all is because it's so incredibly rare for the topic to be discussed today. The topic's becoming extinct, just like the criticisms against feminism have gone extinct. They never talk about feminism anymore. And pretty soon, I don't think they'll be talking about LGBTQism anymore. And that's not an overstatement. You almost never hear these guys condemn LGBTQ advocacy. The only time they do it is to appease the older, more conservative members of the church. And it happens roughly every several years. Once every several years, people lose patience and start to question the loyalty of church leaders. And when this happens, you'll get Oakes, Holland, or some other corrupt apostle to give some half-hearted talk about the family, right? And that's all it takes to pacify a lot of you people. They go up to the pulpit and say, "Trust us, bro. We know what's happening at BYU, and we're not happy about it." And then as you praise them for giving that little speech, they will go back to working behind the scenes to make church institutions and Mormon-populated areas woke. They supported the Respect for Marriage Act. They supported the Utah Compromise. They hire people like Aaron Sharonian to run important, influential operations of the church. And they don't fire people like that from BYU. Very rarely, if ever, do they fire anybody for being woke. So, do you see what's happening here? They're orchestrating everything. They know everything that happens with BYU, every detail, right down to the individual truck or car or any piece of property that is bought in BYU's name.
President Nelson chairs our board, holds our purse strings, and has the final yay or nay on every proposal we make, from a research lab to more undergraduate study space to approving a new pickup for the physical facilities staff.
So, since they definitely know everything going on at BYU, how do you explain this?
BYU had hired somebody in the 1980s by the name of John Goodlad. He was a modern-day Korihor. He was a socialist, atheist, humanist. He'd won the John Dewey Award, taught there at BYU in the education department for 3 years, then left to start what was called the National Network for Educational Renewal. BYU became one of 11 universities who were founding members of this organization. And John Goodlad, one of his goals was to put the gay agenda into classrooms, to teach social justice. He wrote several books that were clearly anti-family. He made statements like, public school has served as an important check on the power of parents. His design was to separate parents from children. Yep. And have the schools teach the children while they were away from the influence of their parents.
And BYU was one of its founding supporters, donors.
Yes, for 25 years. And I'd written like probably a 4 or 5 page letter to the board of trustees at BYU to like, what in the world? You guys are, BYU, you're still part of his national network 25 years into this thing. What is going on? This guy is bad news. He's anti-family. He stands for everything that you don't or shouldn't, as BYU. And so I actually got Howard Stevenson and Margaret Dayton to sign the letter and deliver it to the church. And Margaret said, they will probably never respond to us, just so you know. But I will tell you they're taking it seriously. And so I was like, okay, well, I did my part, and then I started writing about John Goodlad publicly and put him on my website. And I wrote featured him in a couple of articles to like start exposing him. And at some point I did an op-ed in the Deseret News about him. And it was probably 2 months after that was published that BYU announced they were leaving the NNER for financial reasons.
If church leaders know every little detail about BYU's activities, right down to the vehicles that it buys, then they know about BYU's involvement in this communist organization, and they knew about it for over 25 years. And don't even get me started on BYU's recent Marxist diversity training programs. Our church leaders are overseeing all of it. There's no getting around this. They are traitors who don't want you to exist. If you're a conservative, patriotic, traditional, faithful Mormon, they do not want you to exist. As I've shown you, they have been working behind the scenes for years, decades, to make sure that the youth do not grow up to be like you. You are being culturally choked out of the church. You're being phased out of the church. And it's being done by our own leaders. That's the truth. And that's the truth about Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. He was a traitor, and he deserves to be remembered as a traitor. Now, this may have been an unpleasant or unsettling video, but it had to be made. You are the only one who can save the church from going woke. It is up to you. All of you out there who are on the Lord's side, it's up to you. And the only way to save the church from going woke is to call out those who are making it woke. And if you would like to support me in this mission, then subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter, share my messages with others, and talk about this with others. We have to get a conversation started. If we sit around and do nothing, we will lose everything.